Let's go ahead and open up in prayer, shall we? Abba, Father, in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, thank you for using my daughter to remind me again that I needed to give that testimony. And Yahweh, I just want to thank you for that because it has been so real. I don't know that if you would have done it any other way that I would have wound up where I am right now. Not that I'm anything, but Yahweh, the work that Yeshua has done through me over the years has taught me much. And I thank you for that, Yahweh. And I thank you for using the afflictions that came upon me for whatever reasons to bring me out of this world and into the glorious light of Yeshua. And I thank you, Abba, for everybody here that you have done the same thing, because I've heard their various testimonies and how you've worked through them as well. And so, Abba, we're here today on this Sabbath day to hear your word. We're here to hear your instruction. We're here to hear your heart, what your heart is saying to your people. And you have used your prophets and your apostles to convey those concepts to us. If we can just learn how to get into the Word and be able to extract those messages that your servants have so carefully written down for us. And so now today, Abba, I pray that your Spirit will speak through me and help me to relay very important principles that we need to get from the book of Colossians as we conclude it here today. So with that, Yahweh, we anxiously await to see what it is that you reveal. And I know, Yahweh, as you always do, you will speak to each and every person here uniquely. No one particular thing that will be said today is for everybody exactly. Each of us are going through different things. And I just pray that you'll touch each person's heart and give them the hope and the assurance that they need, Abba, to carry on through the rest of the week until we meet here again as the servants of Yeshua HaMashiach. And for that, Yahweh, we bless you in His mighty name. Amen. Amen. Okay, so today we're going to conclude Colossians study, and we're going to be in the last half of chapter 4. We went through the first half of chapter 4 last week, and it's only 8 verses. But as usual, I've been able to take 8 verses and stretch them out into a 4-hour message. So I hope that your rear ends are not too weak and you'll be able to hold up and your ears are attentive, because I'm not going to make it 4 hours. I'm going to make it 3 hours and 59 minutes. Right. So if that's any consolation, let's go ahead and get started, shall we? All right, Baruch Hashem. All right, so for those of you who weren't here last week, I'm just going to briefly go over what we covered last week. So one of the points that Shaul was making is that if you are a master, in other words, if you're like an employer and you have a business and you have employees, or you're a leader in a fellowship and you have people underneath you, then you must treat them justly. You must treat them justly. He went on to talk about if you're, for example, like an employer, make sure you compensate those who work for you in a wholly just manner, that you don't cheat them out of what is rightfully theirs, because they deserve to enjoy the fruit of the labor of their hands, and we're not to withhold that from them. We also went through a little bit here, as we did through the rest of the other chapters, where Talmudic influences actually were helping to teach the opposite of that. And I cited some verses in the Talmud that talk about how Jews had the legal right to cheat Gentiles out of their wages. And this is of the flesh. This is not of the Spirit. And this is not something we should be doing. But some of these influence of Talmud came into the Colossians, trying to coerce them and help them to see that, oh, you can get away with doing this and you get away with doing that. And we ought not be following those kinds of philosophies designed by men. And the third point is Shaul reaffirms the need for the mystery of the riches of Yeshua. The need to reaffirm the mysteries of Yeshua, and putting on His divine nature and having the power of Yeshua working in your life to be able to destroy the circumstances in your life as well as in the life of other people. The fourth point is to obtain, this is only to be obtained through affliction. And so he goes through a little bit of an explanation that it's through the afflictions and the sufferings that Yeshua went through that we are in agreement with Him on, that we take up our execution stake and we suffer the afflictions as well. That is the only way, that is the only vehicle that you could have that'll put you in that position where you begin to receive the mystery of the riches of Yeshua and His divine nature. And also we discovered some of the co-workers with Shaul, 2 of them, Tychicus and Onesimus, we looked at where their backgrounds were from and how they helped Shaul. So, let's pick up in chapter 4, verse 10, as we conclude this series here. So, we have here, Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, as a co-captive, greets you with Mark, the cousin of Barnabas, about whom you received instructions, which are commandments. If he comes to you, welcome him. So who is this Aristarchus? He was one of those faithful companions of the Apostle Shaul who shared with him his labors and his sufferings. He is suddenly mentioned along with Gaius as having been seized by the excited Ephesians during the riot stirred up by the silversmiths, which you could read later if you like in Acts chapter 19 verse 29. They are designated men of Macedonia, Paul's companions in travel. We learn later that he was a native of Thessalonica. You can find that in Acts chapter 20 verse 4 and 27 verse 2. They were probably seized to extract from them information about their leader Shaul, but when they could tell nothing, and since they were Greeks, nothing further was done to them. When Aristarchus attached himself to Paul, we do not know. But he seems, after the Ephesian uproar, to have remained in Paul's company. He was one of those who accompanied Paul from Greece via Macedonia. You can find that in Acts chapter 20, verse 4. Having preceded Paul to Troas, where they waited for him, they traveled with him to Israel. He is next mentioned as accompanying Paul to Rome in Acts chapter 27, verse 2. There he attended Paul and shared his imprisonment. He is also mentioned in two of the letters of the Roman captivity, in the epistle to the church at Colossians chapter 4 verse 10, which we just read, and the epistle to Philemon chapter 1 verse 24, in both of which he sends his greetings. In the former, Paul calls him my fellow prisoner. According to tradition, he was martyred during the persecution of Nero. Luke gives an ideal example of member of early believing community in Jerusalem. Joseph, the Levite, also known as Barnabas. So he had a regular name and he had a Hebraic name. Barnabas is a significant figure in, so now we're looking at who is Barnabas. We're looking in the book of Acts, introduced here as a member of the community at Jerusalem. So this was his primary base. The introduction of Barnabas at this point in the book is a typical Lucan literary style. In other words, when you read the way Luke writes, it's in that kind of a style. That's what it's basically saying. He often introduces a character who will become significant later in the story. Shaul in 8:1, John, Mark, and James, Yeshua's brothers, in chapter 12. Joseph is a common name in the first century, so his second name might be a nickname. Luke tells us the name means son of encouragement, although this derivation is not particularly obvious. The phrase son of can mean characterized by, such as calling James and John the sons of thunder. For example, the second half of Isaiah has been rightly described as a book of comfort or consolation. Perhaps Barnabas had a personality which could speak the truth with strength and clarity. Kind of something like I do here. Ha 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 ha. Okay. But in such a way as to bring comfort and encouragement to the people as well. Barnabas, and that's a gift. It really is to be able to do that. Barnabas was from Cyprus. We know a community of Jews was present on Cyprus as early as 330 BC, but they were expelled in AD 117. Barnabas sells some of his property and turns the proceeds over to the apostles. We are not told what the property is, although he may have owned some property around Jerusalem, which was a source of income for his family while he worked in the temple, potentially. We're not totally certain that he did actually work in the temple, as there were many Levites who did not. Luke calls him a Levite. Not all Levites were priests, but typically they were wealthy and well-educated regardless of their role in the temple. Levites could be anything from priests to doorkeepers in the temple, but they also might be scribes or teachers of the law. We are not told that Barnabas actually functioned as a Levite in the temple. He may have simply been from a Levitical family. That Barnabas has 2 Hebrew names, has the title of Levite, and had some property in Jerusalem implies that he was less Hellenized or Greekanized, so watered down, and more traditional with respect to his religion. So who was Mark? I think it's important to cover at least a little bit. I try to keep it as condensed as I can. But I think it's important to understand who these other characters who co-labored with Paul, since not a lot is really written about them. And I think it's just interesting to look at them just a little bit here. So who was Mark? The Bible also discloses John Mark's mother had a large house in Jerusalem, where those who embraced Yeshua as the Jewish Messiah were invited to congregate for the preaching, prayer, and fellowship. It is this house where the believers gathered to pray for the Apostle Peter the night before his scheduled execution, and where they witnessed Peter's dramatic testimony of a miraculous escape, which you can find in Acts chapter 12, verses 1 through 19. The fact that John Mark's mother owned a sufficiency, a spacious home, able to house a large gathering of people, that his close cousin Barnabas is reported to have owned real estate in Cyprus. That's just off the western coastline of Israel. Some of which he sold and then gave the proceeds to Jerusalem Messianic Church in Acts chapter 4, verse 36 and 47. Indicates Mark belonged to a prosperous family of significant wealth and means. John Mark traveled along with Barnabas and Saul through the entire length of the island and was witness not only to the dynamic ministry of the word of Yahweh all along the way, but also to remarkable and surely frightening confrontation between Shaul and the Jewish sorcerer Elymas, as described in Acts chapter 13, verse 6 through 12. So clearly, being along with Shaul, he got to experience a lot of supernatural stuff. There are several possibilities for Mark's quitting the mission at this point. This is an interesting concept. We're not really sure what happened, but we'll look at it in a moment. Luke, the writer of the book of Acts, tells us in Acts 15:38, Mark actually deserted his companions. Perhaps a combination of the possible explanations yields a proper understanding of Mark's behavior. Mark may have left, most probably may have left the ministry of Shaul due to his perception of Barnabas being demoted and Shaul taking the lead. So here what you had at the time was you had Shaul and Barnabas both doing a similar work, but it then seems like one of them kind of, like Shaul, got lifted up to a higher prominent position, where Barnabas was not on equal standard with Shaul. And so that may have caused a complex within John Mark, which caused him to have a dispute with Shaul and no longer wanting to go along with him. And oftentimes, you know, I've seen that when I've been in ministry over the years. Intentions start out really well in the beginning, and you have these high aspirations about where you think things are going to go and how things are going to work out, and all of a sudden something switches course on you in the meantime, and all of a sudden you find yourself, wait a minute, I'm in a subservient position now. I don't think I much like that, because we all want to be on top. We all want to be leaders. I mean, that's part of the carnal nature of what we have to fight against. And so therefore, it's not unreasonable to assume that something like this could have happened to John Mark, and that's what caused him to get into an attitude, as we say, and get into a pity party and decide, you know what, if you're going to do this to my cousin Barnabas, then I'm out of here, you know, and I'll go work with Barnabas and forget about Shaul. So let's get back to continuing Colossians. And Yeshua, who is called Justice. Now, this is not Yeshua Messiah. There's a little bit of dispute about the way the name is translated here, because different scripts render it in different ways. We'll get to that in a second. But his name was called Justice, or at least we think it's called Justice. These are my only fellow workers for the kingdom of Yahweh, who are of the circumcision, so they were of the Jewish sect. They have provided to me a comfort to me. So who was Justice? Let's take a little bit of a look at this. There are 3 of this name mentioned in the New Testament. Number 1, it was the Roman surname of Joseph Barsabas, which you can see in Acts chapter 1, verse 23. The second possibility, a Corinthian proselyte Minos ton theon, I don't know what that is, I didn't look it up, whose house adjoined the synagogue, who received Paul when the Jews opposed him in Acts chapter 18 verse 7. He was probably a Roman citizen, one of the colonies, and so he would be of an assistance to the apostle in his work among the better class of those in Corinth. There is some disagreement among manuscripts regarding this name, as I was stating before. Textus Receptus of the New Testament gives Justus alone. That's how it renders it. Excuse me. The Revised Version, British and American following Codex Sinaiticus, Codex E, Vulgate of Armenian, gives Titus Justus. So that's how they render it in that text. Westcott and Hort, the New Testament in Greek, Codex Vaticanus. And Codex Vaticanus, for those who like history, is probably considered the least of these three texts, because Vaticanus was really concocted, as we saw in that documentary, A Lamp in the Dark, how the Catholics were trying to come back and create their own manuscript, which is Vaticanus, to try to override what Wesley, was it Wesley? I forget his name. Tyndale, thank you. Tyndale and another gentleman from England who were trying to convert it into English, and it was rendering more correct doctrine, and the Catholic Church didn't like that because it contradicted him. So when you're looking at Vaticanus, you have to be really careful about what you're reading there, because a lot of it has been manipulated to fit into Catholic doctrine. But anyway, it's possible that they could be correct on some of this stuff as well. They rendered it as Titius Justus. Sine, EB, I'm not sure what EB is, under the word justice, thinks these forms of corruption of Tertius Justus, and that the bearer of the name was the Tertius of Romans chapter 16 verse 22. Paul still continued his lodgings with Aquila and Priscilla, but made the house of Justus his own synagogue. So having house fellowships, kind of like what we have here, was not uncommon in them days. The third one is a Jew, Jesus Justus, mentioned with Mark and Aristarchus by Shaul in his letters to the Colossians, chapter 4, verse 11, is a fellow worker and one that has been a comfort unto him. All right, so we've gotten a look here at a little bit of some of the co-workers and some of the characters involved in Colossians chapter 4 as Paul is giving thanks to. Let's move on. Epaphras, who was basically the overseer of the Colossian fellowship, who is one of you, a bondservant of Messiah, greets you, always laboring fervently to the point of a struggle. So this man was really dedicated to this congregation. For you in prayers that you may stand, that is to commit to perfect, complete, and moral character. This is what Shaul wanted them to do. He wanted them to perfect their moral character. So apparently you could read into this that they were lacking in certain areas in this way, and complete in the fullness of the office. So if you're not complete in moral character, you're not going to complete your office as Yahweh has put you into. It's not that you're not going to be in the office of whatever He's putting you into, or whatever ministry or calling it is, but you're not going to be able to walk in the perfection of it because you have these inconsistencies going on in your life that prevent you from prospering in that area, so you get held down. That's what he's trying to get across. In all the will, in its decrees of Yahweh. So when Yahweh puts you in an office or in a ministry or in a particular calling, it's His desire to see to it that you reach the maximum capacity of that calling or that office. But it's only us that can diminish just how far we go in that office, because if we don't have the full wisdom and spiritual understanding of where our lack is and where we're causing ourselves our own problems of self-sabotage, then we wind up creating the same scenario over and over again, and we never overcome it. Continuing in verse 13, it says, For I bear him witness that he has a great zeal to the point of painful anguish for you, and those who are in Laodicea, and those in Hierapolis. So let's take a look at something interesting. Yeshua establishes congregations in Hasatan's territory. let's take a look. Now, what we know is that Hasatan has come down to Jerusalem, and he has messed up the temple. He's allowed Solomon to bring in Elohims into his temple, and Yahweh's Shekinah glory leaves the temple, and we begin to see a dismantling of the priesthood, and then we begin to see the rise of what is called rabbis, or Talmudic Judaism starts to come in and supplant the priest. Eventually, to where we get to the point that when Yeshua comes to the temple after his Galilean ministry, they then run him out of the temple, and he has to go back down to the area of the Jordan where John was baptizing originally, which is about, I think, about 7 miles north of the Dead Sea. So you're probably talking a good 70 to 90 mile trip. And he couldn't come back to the temple until the Passover came, when it was time for him to be stoned, because they were going to kill him in the month of December. So he had 3 to 4 more months that he had to stay away from Jerusalem before he could come back and finish up his ministry when the Passover came, and then they would crucify him. But Hasatan has had basically jurisdiction over Jerusalem and causing all this religious confusion. So what's interesting is, it's kind of like Yahweh is saying, well, I'm going to, in the midst of Satan's kingdom, I'm going to raise up fellowships in your kingdom. And I'm going to start establishing my word in your kingdom. Let's take a look at this a little bit. This Hierapolis is kind of what it would have looked like in the 3rd century. It really wasn't that big, but there was roughly maybe 100,000 people there. And so this was one of the main territories. Now, I've circled the areas in red, or orange, however you want to call it, to show, because in Pergamum, over here, we know is the seat of Hasatan's throne. So all in this area of Asia Minor over here is where Satan's throne is, and Yahweh is raising up people right underneath his throne. So we got like a dual war going on here over in the Middle East and over in here in Asia Minor. So if you look over here, you see this is Hierapolis over here. But if you notice, you got Colossae and Laodicea are only a couple of miles apart. And what I had talked about earlier in the earlier studies is how Colossae and Laodicea basically wound up merging into one particular city. That Colossae basically phased out. And so what I had said was, it's interesting when you read in the book of Revelation in chapter 2 and chapter 3, you don't see any letters to the congregation of Colossia. There's no letter there. And that's because by the time John from Patmos got this vision, Colossae was pretty much starting to fall apart, and it just melded into Laodicea. But as we'll read later in Colossians, when I finish this up, Paul admonishes the servants to read his letters to the Laodiceans, the Colossians, and the Hierapolis. He wanted all three of them to be able to hear that same message. And we'll see that in the end. So my point here is that for two things. Number one, Yahweh establishes fellowships right underneath Satan's throne, right in his backyard, and is declaring war in his kingdom. And that we don't see a letter written in Revelation to the Colossian church. It was written to the Laodiceans. But they had the same geographical area. They had the same kind of attitudes. They had the same kind of form of employment, which was they were in the fur industry, on the trade routes there, and so forth. So I just thought I'd put that there as a point of reference. So let's take a look at this Hierapolis a little bit. Through the influence of the Apostle Shaul, a church was founded here while he was at Ephesus. The Apostle Philip spent the last years of his life here. The town's martyrium was alleged to have been built upon the spot where Philip was crucified in AD 80. His daughters were also said to have acted as prophetesses in the region. Now, what I'm not sure about, is he talking about prophetesses in the negative sense or in the positive sense? I didn't have time to look into that, so forgive me of that. In the year 60, during the rule of Nero, an even more severe earthquake left the city completely in ruins. Afterwards, the city was rebuilt in Roman style with imperial financial support, in other words, governmental support. It was during this period that the city attained its present form. The theater was built in about AD 190 for a visit by the Emperor Hadrian. It was renovated under the Septimius Severus in 193 to 211 AD when Caracalla, I'm not sure who that is, visited the town in 215 AD. he bestowed the much coveted title of Neokoros upon it, according to the city certain privileges and rights of the sanctuary. This was the golden age of Hierapolis. Thousands of people came to benefit from the medicinal properties of the hot springs. It's interesting, I didn't put it in here, but it's coming to my mind now. When we read in the letter to the Laodiceans, Yeshua speaks in terms of, I wish you were either hot or cold. Why did he use that analogy? Because in this location there were hot springs. And people came from all over to get into these hot springs for healing. It was medicinal. And that's what it was known for. So is it possible that Yeshua was using the metaphor of hot versus cold and lukewarm because of the fact that this city had these hot water springs, which were medicinal? Anyway, let's move on. The new building projects were started. 2 Roman baths, a gymnasium, several temples, a main street with a colonnade, and a fountain at the hot spring. Hierapolis became one of the most prominent cities in the Roman Empire in the fields of the arts, philosophy, and trade. The town grew to 100,000 inhabitants and became wealthy. So let's go back now. We've got to look at that just a little bit to get some idea of the topography and the commercialism and all that, to get some idea of what kind of area these guys were in. So continuing in Colossians chapter 4, verse 14, Luke, the beloved physician, and Demas greet you. Well, who was this Demas? Who was this Demas? This seems to be an indication that this native of Thessalonica was not fully trusted even when he was near Shaul. In Philemon chapter 2, verse 20, we can read that. The scripture has this against him, that he forsook Shaul for this present world. Man, have I seen people do that over the years. In the same way that we can stretch the characters of Demas from the few references to him in the Bible's portrait gallery. Before he met Paul, we can picture him as an agreeable young man with no particular vices. So he seemed to be kind of a neutral kind of guy who was moldable and shapeable into what Shaul wanted to train him to be in. The material of his character had no rent in it. So apparently there was nothing out of the ordinary. He had no particular vice that would be a problem in the beginning. It was only shoddy throughout. Under the strong influence of Paul's personality, Demas was like a piece of soft iron temporarily magnetized by the presence of a magnet. Becoming a disciple, he was carried away by the enthusiasm of sacrifice. So he kind of enjoyed, I think, this lifestyle, being a nomad, walking around the territories with just whatever's on your back and living day by day. That seemed to have some excitement for him. He wanted to live with Paul and die with him and have a throne and a halo among the martyred saints. So he was seeking fame and fortune, so to speak. But when Demas came up to the great capital of then-known world in company with the master's prisoners, Shaul and Epaphras, it was a different story. He was not a prisoner, and gradually the contrast between the prison cell and the outer world became intolerable for him. So this was his defining moment. We all have defining moments in our lives, and it affects us all very differently depending on what your background is. But that is the thing that tests you to know whether what you're made out of. And this was true for him as well. He saw the magnificent halls of the Caesars, the gorgeous homes of the rich, and the glitter of the world of music, vino loves, jest, and wine. Such an elite world cast its glamour over Demas, and he yielded to its charm. The prison where the friends were languished seemed wretched alongside the music-haunted, scented, dazzling halls of Rome. Thus Paul had to write one of the most heartbreaking lines in his letters. Demas had forsaken me. Having loved this present world, this man of wavering impulse, who surrendered the passion of sacrifice and sank in the swirling waters of the world, is a true reflection of the thought that where our love is, there we finally are. In other words, wherever your heart is, wherever your treasure is, that's where you can find a person's heart. And that's one way to test people. It really is. Because if you're not sure where somebody is or where they're thinking, if you just watch their behavior, you see them constantly going to where the treasure is. And if you just follow them to the treasure, by looking at what that treasure is, tells you everything you need to know about that person. Because that treasure has the pull on them. And they're going to gravitate towards it every single time. So back to Colossians again, verse 15, it says, "Greet the brethren who are in Laodicea and Nymphas and the church that is in his house." That word Nymphas is not really a good translation, because the original word actually means certain parts of a woman's reproductive anatomy. I shall say it that way. Okay, and yet this is a man, but it's feminine in nature. So there's questions about how this is actually rendered. And so we'll get into that in a second. "A believing resident in Laodicea, to whom Shaul sends salutations in the epistle which he wrote from Rome to the church in Colossae, the latter city being only a few distant miles from Laodicea." So here we are again. They were very, very close to each other, only a few miles apart. "Nymphas," or Nympha, maybe more correct, be read, "Then it is believing man who is meant was a person of outstanding worth and importance in the church of Laodicea. For he had granted the use of his dwelling house for the ordinary weekly meetings of the called out ones, the church." The apostle's salutation is a threefold one to the brethren that are in Laodicea. That is to the whole of the believing community in that city, and to Nympha, and to the church in his house. So here we go. We got another home fellowship again. This fact that the church met there also shows that Nympha was a person of some means, for a very small house could not have accommodated the believing men and women who gathered together there. The church in Laodicea, judging not only from the epistle to the Ephesians, which is really Paul's epistle to the Laodiceans, and which indicates that the church in Laodicea had a numerous membership, but also from what is said, it is of Revelation chapter 3 verse 17 in the King James Version says, "Must have been large and influential. Thou sayest, I am rich and increase with goods and have need of nothing." And obviously I don't think that this Nymphas guy fell into that category, even though he lived in that city, and it does say this in Revelation, because he does seem to be a generous man. He's giving up his house for the fellowship. Could he have had that attitude too? Maybe, but it doesn't seem like it to me. Anyway, the house of Nympha, therefore, must have possessed a large room or a saloon sufficiently commodious to allow the meeting of a numerous company of people. Nympha would be a person both of believing character and of a generous feeling. Kind of the opposite of what Yeshua rebukes in Revelation chapter 3 of the Laodiceans. He would be both of believing character and of generous feeling, and of some amount of wealth. Nothing more is known regarding him, as this is the only passage in which he is named. So let's go back to Colossians chapter 4 verse 16, continuing. "Now when this epistle is read among you, see that it is read also in the church of Laodiceans, and that you likewise read the epistle from Laodicea." See, so he wanted them all to hear the same thing, because it's addressing them all who are in the same area together. So verse 17, "And say to Aristarchus, take heed to the ministry which you have received, to embrace and learn the office." See, whatever Yahweh's put into our hands, we are to be mindful stewards of that. I'm trying to learn as best I can what he's given me to do. I know I don't do it perfect every time. Matter of fact, I probably don't do it perfect at all. But I'm trying to understand, what is this thing that you've given me? And how am I supposed to do it? And can I do it better next week than I did it the week before? And a lot of times it's a struggle, because Yahweh doesn't really tell me much about it. And I find that when Yahweh doesn't tell you much about what to do, it's usually a sign that what you're doing is sufficient. Don't question me about the details, just keep doing it. If you start to get off the track, I'll start to let you know that you're off track, so that you can get back on track. So that's been kind of my experience in walking in some of this stuff. "In the master, that you may fulfill it." So our job is to fulfill whatever that mandate is. So who is Aristarchus? From the Greek name, meaning in charge of horses, found that to be interesting, was one of the many little known believing servants of Yahweh mentioned in the New Testament. Shaul refers to Aristarchus as his fellow soldier. So apparently these guys he speaks very affectionately of, because they seem to be working very intimately with him and suffering with him through some of the trials and tribulations in their travels in establishing these fellowships. Shaul refers to Archippus as his fellow soldier, a correct translation by the King James Version of the original Greek term which meant exactly that. Archippus, our fellow soldier. So, continuing in Colossians chapter 4, verse 18, it says, "This salutation by my own hand, Paul, remember my chains of shackles, grace be with you." That ends the actual reading of verses, but I'm not done yet. Because in conclusion, in the last, I'm thinking 5 months, I probably accumulated maybe 25 hours of teaching between the Galatians and the Colossians. And as I mull over the thread that seems to go through both of these books and the frustrations of what Shaul was dealing with, basically comes down to this. There are many things, but if I could break it down to its core is this. And it's what we are seeing today in our walk with Yeshua, in this world that we're in. As I had stated so many months back, that what Shaul went through is exactly what we're seeing today if we can pierce the scriptures and dive into them and see what he's trying to tell us. And the core issue is this, is that when they allow the philosophies of men, whatever religious sect it comes from, whether it's from the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Herodians, the Samaritans, the Essenes, not the Essenes, well, even some of the Essenes, but not so much, the Ebionites, and some of these other subgroups that I had talked about in the past, when you allow them to bring in their philosophies and mix it with the covenant of Yeshua, you have at that moment the covenant of Hagar. Because it is a covenant of flesh. And the reason why it's a covenant of flesh is because when Yeshua revealed himself to us as individuals, we saw him in his purity. We saw the pureness of his righteousness. We saw that there was nothing that you or I could do to add to that righteousness that makes it perfect. It was sufficient in itself, and it didn't need anything else. But as I went through these many hours of teaching on this, of what Paul was harping on over and over again, as he was upset with these various groups coming in and taking just little philosophies that they had and subverting them into and impregnating them into the gospel of Yeshua and carrying away the Galatians and carrying away the Colossians because they lacked the full wisdom and spiritual understanding of their walk in Yeshua. And so they were carried away. And this upset Paul immensely. So I said, why do you say this, John? Why did I say it is because I'm trying to make a summary of both of these books who have these common threads. And that today we are experiencing the same thing. We are watching people who are leaving the faith. And the same thing that was going on then is going on today. I just find it absolutely amazing that once I started, that Yahweh had me start this journey with Galatians, and he started revealing this stuff, all of a sudden we started seeing many examples. Jane brought many of them here from the circles that she's in, how people left the faith and went to Judaism. Now, Yahweh, in the name of Yeshua, I'm asking you to help me to say what I'm going to say as loving and respectfully as I can, and that it will be received that way and not as judgmental. Thank you, Abba. My daughter and I were having a discussion last night about some of this stuff. And then we parted and we went to our bedrooms. And then maybe half an hour later, she comes to the bedroom. She says, "Dad, can you turn off the TV? I need to read you something." Okay, this sounds serious. Yeah, it is serious. And after she got done telling me what it was, and I'll tell you in a second, I realized just how significant this event is and how it dovetails in with over and over again what I've been bringing out in the last 5 months with these teachings. And how aware we all need to be about how subtle this covenant of flesh, of Hagar, can creep into our lives without us even realizing it got in. here's what happened. There's a person, I won't mention the name, it's not important, who periodically would come here to fellowship. Seemed like a nice person. Not going to say they're not a nice person. I don't know them that well, but they seem like a nice person. But they had said to my daughter that they were so blessed in coming here. And I'm not trying to puff this ministry up, that's not my point. Because it wasn't even so much here, it was so much with another aspect of this ministry. And that they were highly blessed by it. But they were writing to my daughter to inform them that they are no longer coming back to the fellowship. Not that we did anything wrong, from what I could tell, but wasn't coming back to the fellowship because they're converting to Judaism. Converting to Judaism. Now, this is what I have been speaking on for 5 months now, pounding it week after week. Be careful about this spirit of Judaism. It's alive and well, and it's a strong, strong force. I'm not putting down Jewish people. I'm a Jew. So I'm not putting down Jewish people. What I'm saying is that within men's philosophies of religion, there are spirits. Can I say it this way? If I could only take my 34 years of wars, knock down, drag out wars where there's blood all over the place, casualties all over the place. If I could take you and show you a vision if this thing was all videotaped and show you these wars that I've been through and you could see it in real video, the consequences of all this stuff, and if I could just impart that to you by fiat, just like that, I wish I could do it. But week after week I stand up here and I try to take these experiences I've had and explain it so that I try to help it make sense. Unfortunately, the problem, the frustration that I have is, unless each person goes through it personally, it's hard for them to understand. You might be able to intellectually understand it, but intrinsically, it's not there. And I don't say that to demean anybody, but what I'm saying is that I wish I could, I ask Yahweh always when I'm giving these studies and these teachings, how can I bring out of me the sense of urgency to be on guard that these unclean spirits are real. They are real. And they're in Judaism. They're in Christianity. They're in Buddhism. They're in all these isms. And it's not my point to demean any of the people in these religions. It's about the philosophy. Many of it sounds very well-meaning. But there are unclean spirits in these things. And that's what Paul was talking about. This is the covenant of Hagar. This is what's destroying the Galatians to the point that he says, I think you're so far gone you can't even come back. No matter how much of the Ruach I have, I don't have enough in me to bring you back. And that's how I feel. I feel like a lot of times I stand up here and I give everything I can possibly give from the core of my being and from my experience. Not that I'm anything, that's not my point. But I feel like I always come up short. I always feel like I don't think I really made my point. I don't think that they get it at the level that I got it. And I don't mean to put it down. It's kind of like if you came to me and said, John, I had this experience. I can probably understand what you just said, but I'm never going to feel it the same way you did unless I actually had that same exact experience. And I had the same consequences. So all of us have experiences. You guys have experiences I haven't had yet. So I can sit and I can listen to what you say, what you went through, and I can say, that's terrible. I can sympathize with you and I can empathize with you, but can I really intrinsically say I went through the same thing and I can feel the same negativity of how it impacts you? No, I can't. No, I can't. And for that, forgive me that I can't go that far. I can't replace human experience. I can't replace years of seeing how these unclean spirits destroy people. Now, back to this story. So this person says they're not coming back to the fellowship because they're converting to Judaism. And their part of their reason is that they want to go there for community. What kind of community do you think you're going to get? Because I guarantee you in a few short weeks, you're going to get slapped silly by that culture. I'm not putting down the culture. Please understand. I'm not putting down the culture. What I'm saying is, we like to think in our minds, we create this illusion in our minds that somehow we think the grass is greener over there. And then when we get to the other side of the fence, you find out that grass is quite bitter. It was sweeter on the other side where it was. Just because the grass is green on both sides doesn't mean anything. And so that person is going to become disillusioned because they're claiming that they're not going to give up Yeshua. Do you really think that you can speak Yeshua in their congregation? And do you think you're going to be able to do the things that you think you're going to be able to do in that congregation? When you start to implement that stuff, they're going to come down onto you like a bunch of bricks. I'm going to give you an example. I know a very prominent Messianic rabbi who left the United States to go immigrate to Israel. And I know this man, he's a corrupt man. But he's a Messianic. He's well known. But he's corrupt. Okay? But he went to Israel, and when they asked him on the immigration papers, do you believe in Jesus or Yeshua? He wrote no. Now what did Yeshua say? If you deny me before men, I will deny you before my Father. Well, they let him in. Then somebody tipped off the government. And they found out a year later he was a rabbi for many years here in Fort Lauderdale. They told him, pack your bags, get out, and don't ever come back. Wow. He had to come back. So do you really think you're going to go to this other culture and somehow assimilate your Yeshua in there? I don't think so. You don't understand how demonic jurisdiction actually works. Those demons own that religion. They concocted that religion. And they use men to keep it in force and in check. And they have a much more stringent society there than we have in here. So if you think you're going to get away with that, you're mistaken. And my other issue is this. You want community. We all want community. But how are you going to develop a community here if you're going somewhere else? If all of us decided we're going to get community somewhere else, nobody's here. So how does the body of Messiah develop community, develop a structure when everybody's rebelling against it and they don't want structure? But then you go to somewhere else to get structure? Yahweh, help me to understand these perverted minds and how these people think. This is crazy. So I say this not to condemn the person. I don't condemn the person. I've come to a point in my life where I've come to respect what people believe, what they believe. However much I might disagree with it. I disagree with myself on a lot of stuff. Constantly slapping myself. You stupid, what's the matter with you? Why do you believe that? I don't know why, but it just sounds good, you know. Don't believe that, change your belief. You know. So, you know, I beat up on myself more than I beat up on anybody else, but the thing is, I give people their slack, because what I've come to understand over these years is that I can sit here, or any of us can sit here and point the finger at each other's face. Shame on you. You shouldn't be doing it. You shouldn't believe this. You shouldn't believe it. You should be doing this. You shouldn't be doing that. Could do that. But then we're going to have a fight fest and a food fight like Animal House. Okay? But the thing is that I have come to see that people have to go learn on their own. I've had to let my children, my daughter and my son, even though I tell them, don't do this, you're going to get burned, and it's not only going to burn you, it's going to burn your mother and me, and it's going to age us quicker, and we'll be out of here sooner. They go and do it anyway. You know? And it's painful to watch. And I still tell them, don't do it. They go do it anyway. What do you know? You're an old fogey. Okay. Go do it anyway. And I have to let them. Because I know what the end result is. And I know when Yahweh tells me this is going to be the end result. I know, but what do? There's nothing you can do. They got to go get their knees broken up and get the scabs on them, and they need time to heal, and then they'll say, okay, I got it. And that's really the best way to learn. So I'm not saying you shouldn't tell somebody they really shouldn't do something, give a good compelling reason why they shouldn't do it. But at the end of the day, if they still say, I'm going to go do it anyway, A witness is a witness. I've already said what I got to say. I wish you the best. Yahweh have mercy on the person. But that's the only way to work. So my thing is, if this person feels that they got to go out and do this, be my guest. Go do it. Because you're going to get burned. The sad thing about it is, these people think that what they can do is simply spiritual menage a trois, whatever they call that in French. A threesome. They think that they're going to have Yeshua, them, and this philosophy all in bed together. A menage a trois doesn't work with Yeshua. He's not going to share his bed with his bride with another entity. And yet we think we're so smart that we can go and mix. And it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And what it says to me is that this person is running from something. And this person doesn't want to stop and doesn't want to face what they need to face. And it's a way of escape. And that's sad. And I pray for the person. And I ask Yahweh to have mercy on that person, that they get the point and they get it quickly and they come back. But that's that person's decision. The sad thing is, it's sending a very, very bad message to their mate who's not a believer. And that mate was starting to come along a little bit. And I bet you now it's all shipwrecked. Let me go into the conclusion. In Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 18, is about armoring ourselves. This is what Shaul was trying to get across through both of these books, about how they could armor themselves. Too much of the time, we have holes and gaps in our armor, and the enemy just comes with a spear and sticks right between it and gets us, and we bleed. Finally, my brethren, be strong to the point of empowerment. We are to be strong to the point of empowerment. It may not feel like you're empowered, but that's the moment when you have to really stand up and stir the spirit within you that Yahweh has given. And challenge Yahweh. I got this mountain in front of me. I don't know how to move this thing. Please step into my circumstances. I want this mountain gone. And I'm not going to stop beseeching your throne until this mountain is gone in my life. If it takes 10 years, it's 10 years. But I'm coming and I'm going to be relentless, and I'm going to keep assaulting your throne until you move this doggone mountain. I'm tired of playing complacency and just accepting the mountain being there in my way. But we're not aggravated enough to get to that point. But that's real empowerment. It starts intrinsically within. In the master and in the power of his dominion. See, that's dominion. We have been, when we go back to Genesis, Yahweh says what to Adam and Eve? Let them have dominion. That means you have delegated authority. You have the right to be a prophet and speak out of your mouth what you expect to come to pass in your life. You have that authority. But so many of the times, it happens to me too, you get so beaten up to the point that your mouth doesn't even want to open up and confess what you should be confessing. Thank Ahava. Last week I was telling some non-compliant Ephesians 5 jokes, and she kept getting on my case. Yeah, I know you forgive me. And I forgive you for holding me to account, because I need it. But now you got me thinking, yeah, I need to clean up my joke a little bit. Anyway, let's move on. Verse 11. Put on like sinking into. In other words, it's kind of like this armor is here, and you go and you immerse yourself and you sink into it where it just cloaks all over you. This is what it's getting to in the Greek. The whole armor of Yahweh, that you may be able to have the power to stand and hold up against the wiles and the trickery of the devil. This person has been tricked by the enemy. Tricked by the enemy. And that's because this person has not girded their waistline with the Torah. And if they had properly girded their waistline, their pants wouldn't have fallen down and become exposed. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, human, against powers, which are spiritual, against the rulers of the darkness, who are obscure of this age, against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of Yahweh, that you may be able to, as a possibility. See, putting on the armor, I'm not militarily trained. Tom is somewhat, I think. I know that you two guys are, both Anthony and Roosevelt are, but I wasn't. I can go put on a military uniform or armor, but how do I use it? Just because I got the armor on doesn't mean that I'm invincible. And I'm going to check into this just a little bit more in a minute. So it's a possibility. So once you got the armor on, you now have that possibility. But there are other dynamics that come into play that need to be executed in order for you to be able to do that. You need to know how to do battle. It's not just putting on the armor, but you got to know how to do battle. You got to know how the devil uses trickery to get into that armor and dismantle you. In the evil day, having done all, to stand in covenant. The word stand means in covenant. So we got to stay in covenant. This individual is not staying in covenant because that person is now mixing another covenant with this covenant. And Shaul says the moment you do that, you're cut off from Yeshua. Immediately. You annul Yeshua's covenant message in your life because you can't mix. That's the covenant of Hagar. Verse 14, stand in covenant, therefore, having girded or fastened your waist, the area of the procreative power. This is the area where the procreative power is. This is where the Ruach resides, is in the procreation area of us humans. And once he pierces that area, you're done. With truth, having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace, of shalom. Above all, take the shield that is door-shaped of faith, which you will be able to, with power, to quench by extinguishing. You ever get a fire extinguisher and put out a fire? Or throw a bunch of water on a fire and put it out? It's about extinguishing all the fiery that are glowing darts and are spear-shaped of the wicked one. And the helmet that circles the head of salvation that defends. And the sword of judicial punishment of the Spirit, which is the word and commands of Yahweh. You see, when you wield your sword, the sword comes out of your mouth. That's the word of Yahweh. And when you speak with the delegated authority that's been given to you, as just read, it doesn't necessarily change in that moment, but you have set in motion a new destiny in your life when you begin to speak out of your mouth that which you do not see in the natural, but you see it in the spiritual. You got to confess those things that be not as though they were. And that's the only way these things start to maneuver in your life. I want you to look at this helmet. Does anybody see anything wrong in vulnerability with that helmet? Does anybody see anything wrong with that helmet in the way of what's vulnerable?
The eyes will not.
Predominantly the eyes. And what is it about the eyes? The eyes are the lamp or the entrance into the soul of a man or a woman. When you start reading stuff out there that's anti-Torah or is not of Yeshua, is the covenant of Hagar, it comes in through the eyes. And so that helmet is still vulnerable. It will protect most of your head, but you as a warrior have a responsibility that when those eyes are vulnerable, you take care of when you put yourself in front of the enemy, that you don't allow that enemy to let your eyes see and assimilate and accept that seed of Hasatan. Because as soon as you do that, all that armor is just going to hold a dead carcass. It's going to fall to the floor, and you're going to be a dead carcass on the floor. And so all that armor did you nothing. So as good as that armor is, it's not perfect. Those eyes are exposed, and we need to pay heed as to what it is we're reading and what is influencing us. That's why these people are getting carried away, because they're allowing the seed of Satan to work through other people who don't believe in this gospel to bring a different gospel and pervert the gospel of Yeshua and interject their philosophies and mix it with the righteousness of Yeshua, and you got a different gospel, and now you got a different covenant. You have the covenant of Hagar. Welcome to the world of Hasatan and the spirit of disillusionment. Verse 18, praying always with all prayer and supplication as a petition in the Spirit, being watchful to this end, and with all perseverance through persistence. You must be persistent. Do not give up. Do not the devil let you wear you down to the point where you say, I'm tired of confessing this thing. I'm not seeing anything move. And supplication for all the saints. With that, we conclude Colossians. I pray and I hope that you gleaned something from it. I know I gleaned a lot from it. And if you gleaned something different than I did, I want to hear about it. But let's go ahead and close in prayer, shall we? Abba, Father, in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, we just want to bless you and thank you for coming through, Yahweh, for expounding your word today to help us to learn something, Abba. Something different that applies to our life that maybe we didn't know before, that empowers us to be able to move forward into the kingdom of darkness and take a control and authority over that kingdom of darkness, Yahweh, so that we are not subjects of that kingdom, because we serve Yeshua and we serve a master that empowers us to speak out of our mouth the things, Yahweh, that you want to come to pass in our lives. You say that you want to not do us any harm, but that you will do us good and that you will prosper us, Abba. And so I pray, Yahweh, that you prosper everybody, not only in this fellowship, Abba, but that you prosper all of your people around the world to come to the understanding that we have got to stop mixing these erroneous beliefs of these other human philosophies written by men who are not inspired by the Ruach HaKodesh, who are writing all these books and stuff that doctrines are being formulated from, and that arguments and divisions are occurring within the body of Messiah. We understand, Yahweh, that these divisions have to happen, because it's through those divisions that you begin to see who really has your heart, who wants to maintain the pureness of your word and not mix it. That is what you are looking for in the midst of these things. But help us, Abba, to not get caught up in all this wave of anarchy that's going on in the body of Messiah, but to preserve our own souls and not give our crowns away to the enemy. And so for that, Yahweh, I pray that you empower your people to understand these principles of spiritual warfare, and that they become experts at it, Abba, so that they can understand immediately when a wrong spirit is coming into their presence, and that they may be able to rebuke it. And for that, Yahweh, I praise you and thank you. And now, Yahweh, may your Spirit continue to be here and abide with us on this Sabbath, and that may our talk and our conduct be becoming to you, and may it honor you, Yahweh. In the name of Yeshua HaMashiach we pray. Amen.